Thanks for joining me today for episode 125 of Think Big with Michael Zellner, powered by Platinum Jewelers. Joining me today for part 2 of his podcast episode is Geoff Calkins. Geoff is the lead sports columnist for the Daily Memphian. He was a sports columnist at the Commercial Appeal for 22 years. Geoff graduated with a BA in history from Harvard University in 1983. He is the author of the book After the Jump, which was published back in 2016. He's also host of the Geoff Calkins Show, which is every Monday through Friday from 9 to 11 a.m. on 92.9 ESPN Sports Radio here in Memphis. And he is a 5-time winner of the AP Sports Editor's Best Sports Columnist in America. Welcome back to the show, Geoff.
Good to be back, Michael. I'm surprised that you hadn't tired of me after the first one, but I'm happy to be here to talk about whatever.
Not at all. As like I told you, I had a lot of great response and definitely wanted to have you back on again for a second time. So May 21st, 2018, I believe that was your final article at the Commercial Appeal. It was titled, quote, "After 22 years, it's hard to say farewell," unquote. Great article where your main focus was not on you and what you had done while, you were writing the paper, but it was about several of the people that you'd written about over the years. I love this quote of yours. You said, quote, "The best part of being a local columnist is being a local columnist. My favorite stories were the ones I could get into my minivan," unquote. It was going out, go face to face with people you were writing about where you got, the real stories.
I'm say that again. I'm plugging in my computer because it was battery. But so about the minivan, yes, that's all true. What was the question?
I was going out, face to face with people like you did when you were in the minivan. Is that where you were able to get a lot of the real stories?
Well, I mean, I get stories. I guess my point in that was there's a lot of glamour in my job, and I think there's a lot of glamour or perceived glamour in the job. I've covered 8 Olympics. I've covered a bunch of Super Bowls. I've covered the Masters golf tournament. I've covered the Kentucky Derby. I've covered a lot of things. But the best part of the job has been the connection to Memphis, to a place. Like once upon a time when I was growing up, a lot of people wanted to work for Sports Illustrated. Like that was it. You'd wait for Sports Illustrated to come every week. And if you could ever write for Sports Illustrated, that would just be the best. Now, Sports Illustrated now isn't what it once was for all kinds of complicated reasons. But somewhere along the way, I realized that even though that was not the way my path took me, I wouldn't have liked it as much, because what I really like is being a part of a community and having that loop between the things I write. It almost be a conversation, and it's continued. It's continued on the radio show. It's continued at the grocery store. It's continued, at conversations like this. And so that's the most fun, is really being part and feeling like you kind of almost have an impact on the actual community. And so, and then the stories that mean the most, like if I'm writing about a gold medal winner at the Olympics, 72 different people are writing about that same gold medal winner at the Olympics. Right. But I wrote about a MUS kid who died 5.5 years ago. He was off in college, and he was in a horrible accident and died. And sadly enough, there was another MUS tragedy this week. An MUS football player was killed in an accident on an ATV. And the father of the original boy, Jackson, he wrote me, remembering the column that I wrote about his kid. And it turns out that the kid who just died had once gotten a scholarship in the name of the previous boy. But I guess that's what I'm talking about, is that like the columns that meant the most to me were columns that in the old days, back when I worked at a physical newspaper, that people would cut out and put on their refrigerator or put in an envelope and save for just because it meant something to them, or put in the mail and send to their mother or whatever else. And those tended not to be about, about the Patriots winning the Super Bowl. They tended to be about just regular old people here in Memphis.
After Eliza Fletcher was murdered, this past September, Daniel Heineman put together, quote, "Let's finish Liza's run." I think what you said, Geoff, couldn't have been said any better. You said, quote, "We shouldn't need personal police helicopters, of course. We shouldn't need runs to honor a junior kindergarten teacher carried from our streets, but we sure do need each other. And we need the spirit that connected everyone at Friday's event, a spirit of resilience, determination, and hope. No, one run will not change the trajectory of the city. It will require much more than that. It will require a hard, honest assessment of the pandemic of violence. It will require a willingness to do the things that have to be done. It will require a level of competence and vision that, let's be honest about it, we have lacked," unquote. What happened is so horrible and disgusting. And unfortunately, as you and I both know, with time, people forget things and move on with their lives. And we rarely even hear her name much anymore. And where we should hear it, obviously, much more often. It makes us sick inside to know what, she went through that horrible morning. It shouldn't take something like this to happen for people to realize how precious life really is. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously the Eliza Fletcher thing was incredibly tragic, and it was one of those days when I wrote about the run. To me, there are some things that struck me were Danielle Heineman, who started the Liza's run. She didn't know Liza. She's just one person with a good idea. Like,
Right.
And so it was an example of what a difference one person can make. That was part of it. Obviously, we have a huge crime problem, and it goes well beyond Eliza Fletcher. And we tend to pay more attention to the, pretty school teacher who's murdered than people from other parts of the community or who look different than are murdered. But the Eliza Fletcher thing was horrific. And a lot of the crimes that have happened are horrific. Since then are horrific. So I don't know what I guess what struck me was, even now there's so much talk about crime in the city, but a lot of it feels like finger pointing rather than the spirit of that morning, which was, let's do what we can in the moment to try to make this a better community. And it strikes me that right now, and I'm no expert on this stuff, but in the same way that when we had COVID, we had to deal with, we had community leaders coming together every month to talk about solutions, and everyone didn't agree on all the solutions or whatever, but it was recognized as an incredible crisis that had to be addressed. And it strikes me now, I don't see a lot of that. I just see a lot of people, some people are pointing at one thing and other people are pointing at another thing, and people are using crime as everyone's frustrated by it.
Sure.
But instead of saying, hey, let's see what we can do as a community to fix this, it's more like, well, you guys are the problem, or you guys are the problem, or that's the problem, or that's the problem. And that doesn't strike me to be how we're going to best get out of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about a lot with my friends, and I think I may have mentioned it on a podcast before. It's great that we're getting all this money to fix up. I don't know if I know how the exact number. Maybe it's $350 million or so that the city's getting to fix up the FedEx Forum and Liberty Stadium and build the soccer stadium and knocking down the Coliseum, which I hate. I wish they could keep the Coliseum and but just because I'm an old Coliseum Tiger basketball wrestling guy, that,
Right.
But all that money that they're doing, it's wonderful and it's great. And I'm not saying those things don't need to be done, but unless we take money and put it into the poor communities, build really, like, for example, I mean, obviously a lot has to be done, but like really nice community centers with people, staff there that are good role models and influence on people and everything, and get to those kids when they're young. A lot of those kids, don't see a way out. They're young, they come home, maybe, they only have one parent, and maybe they are both parents, and they're working, and they see, all these friends of theirs or people they know maybe in gangs, and they see that as the way out. If they have other options, if they have, community centers and things like that and role models, I think you have to start from the inside out, and that's the way to help these children, because I think a lot of them feel like they just don't have a chance to get out.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think most of the crime comes from poverty and hopelessness and all of that. It was interesting. Sam Hardiman had a piece in the Daily Memphian this week where he was quoting one of the members of city council, because they were talking about having a tax increase. And what he said is that voting for a tax increase for programs to help kids is, the truth of the matter is, it's a hard thing for politicians to do because it's amorphous. All right. We have this program. We don't know exactly what it's going to accomplish. It's going to be 5 years until we see necessarily what it does accomplish, and it's a lot easier to honestly spend money on building structures than it is on investing into programs. And do people really I think most people, if they thought that raising their taxes would severely diminish crime, most people would say, go ahead, I'll do that. I'll do that. The problem is that I think there's very little faith, either justifiable or not, that one thing will translate into the other, and that it won't just go off into the abyss. And so that's the other. Again, now we're way into things that I way above my pay grade, but it does strike me that it's not just that we have these problems. It's that we have problems in the institutions that are supposed to address the problems. So the police are supposed to keep us safe, and yet we have problems in the police force, which obviously most exemplified by the Tyree Nichols thing, but then all of the fallout from that, both the fact that maybe there's been over-policing, I think pretty clearly, and discriminatory policing on the other hand. Then it's also, you don't want police to be hobbled from actually doing their jobs. And so all kinds of schools are supposed to educate our kids. That's another one of our huge institutions and bulwarks against poverty and hopelessness. Well, we can't even pick a damn a superintendent. We're going around and around and around on picking a superintendent. So it just feels like there's and then you talk about Wanda Halbert in the county clerk's office, and it feels like you can't even get a freaking driver's license if you want, or a marriage license if you want. And so there is a level of, it's easy, it seems to me, to despair if you're in Memphis now, because the institutions don't feel like they're working for us. But I think despair is itself damaging. And it does us no good. We have been in much worse, this is a city that has survived the assassination of Martin Luther King and the hollowing out of the urban centers in the wake of that. This is a city that has survived the yellow fever. This is a city that can, with resilience and, optimism and survive this. But it does feel like a moment that requires people to take a deep breath and figure out what they can do to contribute in a positive way.
Absolutely. One of the things that you got to do was you got to you were around for the entire grit and grind era, with Mike and Mark and Tony and Zebo, and cover those guys. And, they won a ton of games. I believe they averaged over 50 a year. What they did for the city was even more important. I think that, you go to a Grizzlies game, and, when we talk about, people getting along and pointing fingers, when you go to a Grizzlies game, there's people of all different ages and races and religions, and everyone's having such a great time, and high-fiving, getting along. There's so much excitement. And I always say to people, that's the way life should be. And of course, that's fantasy, because it's not going to be that way outside of situations like that. What was it like for you to cover those guys, and, how special were those years with them?
Oh, it was wonderful, because it was also so surprising. Like, it came in the wake of, several years of ineptitude. And then it felt like the team was doing everything wrong. It was spending a second round pick, and the second pick of the draft, on Hasheem Thabeet. It was getting unlucky. It wasn't getting the first or second pick in the Greg Oden, Kevin Durant draft. He ended up with the Booby Prize in that draft, with the pick that turned into Mike Conley. And it was one thing after another. And so it was, and then Lionel Hollins, who was hired to be the coach sort of only on a very short-term contract, and that was not considered a particularly inspired hire at the time. And yet they just, and maybe there is a lesson in there. They just sort of said, well, this is, we are who we got here. And it became this just wonderful story of, Zach Randolph, who'd gone from team to team to team and had a bad reputation before he got to Memphis. Marc Gasol, who was known as Powell's fat little brother, second round pick, but a fat little brother with those ridiculous pictures from the days he played at Lausanne.
Right.
Tony Allen, who was kind of a nut, and the Celtics didn't think even well enough to keep him. And then Mike Conley, who was, as I said, considered the booby prize in this. He was the fourth pick after Greg Oden, Kevin Durant, Al Horford, I think, was next, and then Mike Conley. And yet those four, they did it. And in the process, I really do think, in a totally organic fashion, like that whole phrase, grit grind, that wasn't some advertising agency. That was Tony after a game. They came to help us redefine Memphis. And I mean, I think we are in a crisis right now, a different kind of crisis right now, and maybe a deeper one because of all the crime. But there was a real crisis of confidence and inferiority, and at that point, and maybe we got a little carried away with it a little bit. It's possible we didn't need to name everything 901, or grit grind or whatever else. But all of a sudden, the same things that people felt bad about the city it put a spring in people's step. They were things that people puffed up their chest about. Like grit grind is just a way of taking a certain, blue collar personality of a place and turning it into a positive. And that's what they did. And so, no, it didn't. I've never believed that in order for a particular era of a team to be successful, they have to win a championship. I mean, did Larry Finch Tigers win a championship? No. Did the Dana Kirk Tigers win a championship? No. You can still give people a memorable experience and do great things for a community if it falls short. And that team was never a real threat to win a title, but they absolutely were fun to cover. And also like good guys. Like I to this day, if I saw any of them, they would, ask me how my family is. And it's
nice.
A different kind of relationship we had with them. Something has just changed. Like the way we interact with players now has changed. But yeah, it was a lovely group of players. And I think, there was a mutual love affair between the city and those players.
Another thing is, a lot of times when a player gets traded to another team, a city like maybe is upset about it. Like, they don't want that person to be successful. Like, we talked about on the first episode when we talked about Calipari, for the first several years, people are like, it's died down now, but, people are like, I don't want him to win a title, and he's only got one out of all that talent, but, he did get the one. Marc Gasol gets traded to Toronto, and that same year they won the title. And I remember watching him during, and being just so happy for the guy. I mean, just because he's just such a great guy.
It was a totally different circumstance. What matters there, you're exactly right. People really liked Mark. We were all happy for him winning the title. He got hammered during the parade. That was fun too. But so much is the circumstances of your departure. Like when John left, he left, and Memphis didn't want him to leave. Like the Memphians did not, under any circumstances, want him to leave and felt betrayed. Mark was traded away. Mark didn't choose to leave. Mark was traded away, and that's very different. And he was traded away after it was very clear that everything that group was going to accomplish, that they had accomplished. It was over. And so it's a very different circumstance people didn't begrudge Mike when he left. People didn't begrudge Tony when he left. People forget Tony left too.
Right.
People certainly didn't begrudge Mark when he left, but that's very different than a player who or a coach who chooses to leave and says, "You guys can offer me the world here." but I like this other offer better.
Are you shopping for a new watch, an engagement ring, any kind of jewelry at all? What's up, Memphis? This is Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Grizzlies, encouraging you all to shop where I shop, Platinum Jewelers here in Memphis. Platinum Jewelers has a big selection of earrings, stockable rings, luxury watches, necklaces, bracelets, really whenever you need. 9387 Poplar next to Fresh Market in Germantown. So if you need anything jewelry related, go to my spot, Platinum Jewelers.
And the city embraces people. I mean, you look at the situation like with Mario Chalmers. I mean, obviously we know what happened in 2008 and that moment that just, tore the city apart, in so many ways. And then he comes and plays for the Grizzlies. And, I think at the very beginning, there was a little bit of, hesitance, but then he started playing really well and hitting it. And then that guy was cheered here like crazy. And who would have ever thought that would happen?
Yeah, I don't know that that's unique to Memphis. I think that's, you don't like them when they play for you. You're happy when they play. You don't want to play for the other guy. Another example of that is Steven Adams. Like when Steven Adams played for the Thunder, he's the guy who got Zach tossed out of Game 7.
Right.
We hated Steven Adams then, and yet now he's, I would say, if not the most popular Grizzly, he's clearly one of the most popular Grizzlies. And so it's easy to hate the guy in wearing the other uniforms, and certainly for Mario Chalmers. That was an easy one to hate, but yeah, it minds turn pretty quickly when they start scoring buckets for the good guys.
Ja Morant, drafted here, I believe in 2018. We ended up getting the second pick, and obviously, at the time thinking, that worked out, it ended up working out better because of, Zion having so many injuries. Super talented basketball player. You see him with the fans and the little kids off the court and everything. And, given his jersey, seems to be very giving and plays hard on the court. And then obviously all the stuff that's happened over the last several months. You've written obviously several columns about that in the paper and talked about this a lot. What do you think about the situation for people that maybe have not read any of your columns or heard you talk about it on the radio show? What do you think about the situation overall? And what do you think is going to end up probably happening, which, just like you said, could be announced any moment now?
Yeah, we're taping this on Thursday afternoon, and I suppose it's possible that Adam Silver could hand down the decision at any point. So who knows?
Right.
But it's all be moot soon. I think the truth of the matter is it's obviously troublesome. It was obviously reckless of Ja to do what he did the first time, waving a gun on Instagram, and then to do it again is beyond reckless. It's almost hard to get your mind around. So I think it's evidence of a guy having a troubled time. I think he's having real struggles. I think that's true. And then I think everybody wishes him well. We wish him well because he's a human being and we wish him well. And then B, we wish him well because selfishly, he's the best player on this team. He's the most famous Memphian that there's been really since Elvis. And so we wish him well. What the path looks like to get from here to there. I think the things that we see, the joy that Ja can play with sometimes, the way that he interacts with the fans, but like all that's real. Like people are complicated. And then I think the other stuff is real too. Yeah. It just seems reckless and out of control is what it seems. There are certainly players who've done many worse things. Domestic violence and that's why when people start talking about 50-game suspensions, it seems crazy to me. There's been Miles Bridges got a 30-game suspension and he, beat up I guess it was his wife. And I don't think the mother of his child, I think it was his actual wife. And so I can't imagine John's going to get more than that. It has always seemed to me that what the league should do and probably is going to do is try to fashion some combination of discipline, which is clearly in order, but also some manner of support to get Ja from here to where they want him to be, because it's in the league's interest to have Ja be a compelling face of the league. He is that. Absolutely. Like he's a potential real draw. So and so I don't think it's just going to be, all right, the punishment's 15 games or 20 games or 25 games or 30 games. I think it's going to be all right, the punishment's going to be 25 games and Ja's going to do this much counseling, and whether we'll hear about all those things, I don't know. But this is more, it's not just about coming up with the right number of games. It's about how you help Ja change. And it's hard to change. It really is hard to change. He's in his young 20s, and lots of people in their young 20s don't have issues, but a lot do have issues. And so there's nothing to do other than hope for the best. I find I would like it if one of the things that was handed down as part of his discipline was no social media for a year. Let someone else run your social media accounts for a year, because I think that can really be corrosive, and has not helped him whatsoever. But obviously that's not the main thing, but maybe that'll be part of what we learn.
And that actually was a question I was going to ask you next but how do you think that social media has changed sports?
Oh, all kinds of ways, but I don't think it's just changed sports. I think it's changed life. I think it's changed the way, right now I can't imagine, people are just collecting likes and if you're an 11-year-old kid and you're on social media all day long on TikTok or whatever, and you're seeing beautiful people, and you're seeing your values are shaped, your attention span is shaped, I think it's really damaging. I mean, the Surgeon General basically said recently, put out a warning saying that social media is a real threat to young people, and we don't know exactly the way that's going to impact people. And so then you look at the guy's got 8 million. I don't have it in front of me, 8 million Twitter followers or something like that.
Yeah,
or it's like
something
8 million or something. That's crazy. And half of those people are telling him he's a thug and saying racist things to him and ugly, and then half the people are telling him he's the greatest person in the world. And it's just like, I get upset if one person, even as long as I've done this, if one person rips me for a column I've written, I'll want to respond to that person. I'll try not to, because it doesn't benefit me, but that's one person. If 10,000 fans are calling you, like, it's incredibly damaging, it seems to me. And then just let's be honest, he got in trouble because he was on social media. Like, it was that vehicle by which we saw the gun. And what's the need to go chronicle everything in your life, to not just be having fun, but to show the world you're having fun? It doesn't count as fun unless it's on Instagram. It's just, whole thing's bizarre to me and damaging. And I think Ja's just a creature of it. So I think it's really problematic. In terms of athletics generally, sports generally, we do get much greater access to athletes, and athletes have much more direct access to fans now. They can say what they want to say directly. And I guess, so there are some good things there, but on balance, I think it's been really corrosive.
You talked about, John and him being real, what you see on the court and his interaction with fans. I had on last fall, Trey Draper came on my show, one of his off-season trainers. And one of the things he said about Ja is Ja has the biggest heart. And it seems like he really does. And you're right. You can, I guess you have to compartmentalize things and saying you can have a really big heart and be great with the fans and be amazing on the court, but then you can also have a lot of issues that you have to deal with.
I mean, we've seen that a lot of people. John Daly had an enormous heart. Like, John Daly, incredible heart, was incredibly good with fans, Make-A-Wish, all of that. And very clearly also had big addiction issues and, and definitely had his ups and downs. Let's just put it that way. So
right.
I don't know. I know lots of people who've had substance issues or addiction issues or whatever else. And I'm not saying Ja has them, although it wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, a big heart can go with that. The problem is that, the big heart needs to be tempered with the big brain, right? Or the common sense as well. And, I think we're seeing some of that.
I mean, I think it's secondary, but obviously think about he has all the money in the world, but think about all the money he's lost. I mean, you think about how hard people work for their money these days, for anything. And then, he maybe didn't get selected as an all-star, and that cost him money, and, possibly going to cost him money with endorsements over his career too. I mean, that's a big deal in the long run,
I suspect I don't know. I don't know what it's like to have a $200 million contract and
Right.
another however many $1 million contract with Nike and however, like whatever. But my suspicion is that what's more bothersome to him is the humiliation than the actual. He has so much money. Like, I'm not saying it's not meaningful, but I suspect a year ago he could do no wrong. Like, he
Right.
was the face of the NBA. And now people are clowning on him. They're calling him an idiot. They're saying, or a thug, or they're either saying racist things, or they're just calling him an idiot, or they're and players who he may have respected are ripping him. Like, who is in his corner now? Like, I don't know anyone. And so I think that's probably harder for Ja than the financial losses, just because he still has so much more money and so much more opportunity to make a lot of it back. And then honestly, I think even when it comes to the all NBA stuff, does it bother him more that he didn't get the 40 million, or does it bother him more that he wasn't all NBA?
Right.
I think it probably bothers him that he wasn't all NBA. But he's done this to himself. I mean, there's no question he's done it to himself, and I hope he realizes that.
I do too. And I think that, if he does and he gets the right help, he can resurrect his career, because, I mean, we remember what happened with Kobe Bryant back in 2003 with the rape allegations and all that. And he could, this is before social media obviously really got going, but, by the end of his career, I mean, he was beloved by everyone. So he can change things. It's just, he's got to want to do it.
Yeah, he's got to want to do it, and it takes a little bit of time. But honestly, the truth of the matter is, if he came back from the suspension, was clean, did all the right things next year, and led the Grizzlies to the NBA Finals where they lost, let's just say, it would be a great redemption story. Like, as soon as this time next year, it doesn't take 5 years to turn this around. It just takes. I mean, Ja is so unbelievably talented that people are going to fall in love with his gifts no matter what. So you just have to stop doing stupid stuff and then be the awesome basketball player you can be, and people are going to love you again. The truth of the matter is, I think most people still do. Like, it's not like a shoe has stopped selling. Every time they drop one of the shoes, it sells out in 3 seconds. So yes, I have no doubt that he could reclaim this very quickly.
Your mom and dad, Dr. Virginia Calkins and Dr. Evan Calkins, that they met at Johns Hopkins and were married for 73 years before your father passed away at the age of 99 in 2020. And mom lived a really long life too. She was 97, I believe, when she passed in October of 2021. Virginia was a physician at the former Gowanda Psychiatric Center, and Evan was the chairman of the Department of Medicine at the University of Buffalo. He founded its division of geriatrics and gerontology. Of your mom a few years ago, you said, quote, "She likes everyone. She finds dignity in every human being and welcomes everyone. She befriends everyone, including the cook who makes her dog's hamburgers at McDonald's," unquote. Dad, you said, quote, "My father taught me the importance of enthusiasm in whatever you choose to do, and that your work should be your pleasure and vice versa. Also, that each of us is supposed to make a contribution to the world. You're not put here just to have fun. You're put here to have fun while making a contribution," unquote. They had 9 children, 31 grandchildren, 9 great-grandchildren. Wow. It sounds like they led just an incredible and meaningful life, both separately and together too, Geoff.
Oh yeah. I mean, I feel lucky to grow up in the family that I grew up in, obviously. And it wasn't all easy. Like, it's funny, mom had 9 kids, but her first and third pregnancies were full-term stillborn. So she actually had 11 full pregnancies. So it wasn't like everything wasn't easy. When I was in 3rd grade, I was diagnosed with leukemia. That's not easy. So it wasn't some, magic carpet ride. But I honestly don't know how. Like, 9 kids, both doctors, and then we had 3 exchange students stay with us for a full year each. A family mom and dad were killed in a car accident. That family moved in with us for several months. We had horses, dogs, sheep, chickens, ducks, guinea pigs, rabbits, a raccoon, a monkey, the goat and the cow were not very successful. Neither was the monkey, honestly. And I mean, it was a crazy menagerie. And then my parents were in many ways very different. They also weren't like, they were very, sort of old Protestant family. They always slept in twin beds, separate twin beds together. I mean, apart from each other. They were not, particularly affectionate. They did their work and they raised their kids. And I was incredibly lucky to have them. One of the nice things is that during the pandemic, after my dad died, and my dad was still taking care of my mom. My dad was 99 when he died. He was still taking care of my mom. That's all. It's just dad and mom in the house, 99, and she was 96 at the time. And he ended up, it was right after Christmas. He was going down to take some of the recycling into the basement or to get a box for recycling. And he fell down the stairs and hit his head and died at the age of 99 and a half, basically, which is a great way to go. 99 and a half, never a day in the hospital. But after that, mom was really infirm. And so we started having people stay. And on the weekends, one of the kids would go home and then we'd do a family Zoom that Saturday at 4 just to connect and give mom something to look forward to and give the kid who was visiting mom something. And then she died on her birthday, on her 97th birthday. And we, to this day, do a family Zoom every Saturday at 4:00 Memphis time. And most days, all 9 of us are there. Some days it's 7, some days it's 8. A rare day it might be 6, but most days it's 9. And so that's the other part of the legacy, is that I feel really lucky that I have 8 brothers and sisters who are cut from much the same cloth and who believe in the same things and love each other. And it's really an incredible gift.
That's awesome that y'all still do that. What an honor to your family to do that. You have, I believe you have 3 sons, I believe Ben, Andrew, and Peter, if I'm right. Yep. You share quite a bit about your kids over the years on the radio, Geoff, but for maybe those that were not tuned in, tell us maybe just a little bit more about them and what they brought to your life.
Oh, partly when I tell stories about my family, I hope that it's not because it's my family's different or in any way. Even like when I wrote about taking mom and dad to Disney, it was so people could relate to their own families. And I don't think that my experience with my kids are unique or anything else. I think, I wrote a column about dropping off Peter goes to Duke. And so he was the last one of my kids to take to college. And I wrote about that feeling of taking your last kid to college. And to me, when I do that, I think a lot of people who have been through that, and not everyone goes to college, and some people go to local colleges, and so they don't have the experience of taking your kid to college, but for a good number of us, we do. And so I try to write about things that are personal, but that are also universal. But like all my kids, they're great kids, and I love them dearly, and I worry about them all the time. Like, I just worry about them all the time. I think that's what you're meant to do as a parent. And my little brother, back when he didn't have kids yet, and he was talking about having kids, and he said, it's weird. He said, everyone says have kids. He said, but it's like everyone's over there on this island, and they're all saying, come on over to this island. Come on over to this island. You should move to this island. But once you move to that island, you can never leave. And the truth of the matter is he was looking at people on the island. They all look exhausted, bedraggled, not particularly happy. They're like, they're all, and it's like, but like, that's when you decide to be a parent, that's the island you're moving to. And there's definite challenges with it. And I've had challenges with all 3 of my kids, but right now they're all doing well. Ben works in New York in finance, and Andrew is selling pizzas. He just graduated from UT Chattanooga. He's on the autism spectrum and really super smart kid. It'll be interesting to figure out what employment looks like for him, because he's a math guy. He's a actuarial and data scientist and whatever, but as a kid on the spectrum, he's not great at job hunting and schmoozing and doing that stuff. And so I worry about him for that. And then Peter, my youngest, who's a rising senior now at Duke, he's working for Raymond James this summer here in Memphis.
Nice.
And but he like, when he was 8 months old, we were told he was legally blind. And legally blind doesn't mean blind. Like you couldn't tell. Truth of the matter is but he can't read. If he goes to McDonald's, he can't read the sign. You can't tell what the number 2 meal is, for example. He's got no clue. Like and even as corrected, it doesn't matter. Like and I remember at 8 months old, because he wasn't looking at us. And back then, it's funny, we didn't know my previous kid was on the spectrum, and we thought, but I remember saying to Dr. Zebarth, the pediatrician, I said, "Are you worried that he has autism?" And he said, "No, I'm worried he can't see worth a flip." and he couldn't. And so he's had his own things I'm worried about with Peter. But they're a joy. They're a total joy. And I'm proud of them and all of that. But it is also true that, and I think any parent relates, you just worry. And you worry differently now that they're out of the house. Like I can't worry about what time they're coming in or are they coming in or whatever, because I don't know what they're doing on a given night. But to be a parent is to worry. It's just, to me, that's just true.
What are the most important lessons that you've learned in life?
Oh, I can't possibly. That's too big.
I know it is.
Most important lessons I've learned in life. I don't know. I really don't know.
Just had to pick a couple.
Yeah. My friend Scott Morris gave a commencement address once, and one of his pieces of advice was get a dog. And so that's a good piece of advice. Get a dog. Get a dog. They'll always love you. They'll keep you honest. They give you a reason to get up in the morning. And so I believe in that. I think humility is really hard. It was hard for me. But I think it's important. I don't know. I don't really have particular lessons. Like one of the things that people say, this is one of the things people say, but you, Geoff, the lesson must be follow your bliss, do your dream, whatever else. And I don't know that that's my lesson. Like if you look at my career, yes, I once was a lawyer. I stopped being an unhappy lawyer and became a happy sports writer. Right. And so you could take from that, follow your bliss, right? Oh, you should do what you love what you do. Well, not everyone can do what they love. Like a lot of jobs are just jobs. Yeah. And people have to do them. Like someone changes the sheets at a hotel, and someone works at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and someone like I don't know that everyone's job has to be the thing that transports them. I was really bad. I was intensely unhappy as a lawyer. I was kind of falling apart. It wasn't really much. I didn't have much choice because I couldn't. I don't know what a breakdown is exactly, but I think I was probably having an emotional breakdown. So I couldn't keep being a lawyer. But I didn't know for sure I was going to love being a sports writer. But I tried to do something else. I just tried to do something else and kept at it. And then that turned out to be something that I liked and was good at and could sustain me. But I don't know. Like, I think that piece of advice, to do, here's another piece of advice would be to do what you're good at. Like recognize what your talents are, not just do what you love. Maybe you love eating chicken wings and playing video games. Do what you're good at, like recognize what you're really good at and hone in on those things and figure out a way to make a living doing those things, I think matter. I think go easy on yourself in your 20s. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves in our 20s. I know I did, to figure out what we're doing for our lives, finding the right partner. And if you haven't done it, you're some kind of a failure if you haven't done that in your 20s. I think for me, my 20s were really hard because of those reasons. But I don't have any great life lessons, I'm afraid. I'm just doing the best I can.
But you just gave some great ones, so thank you for those. How can people find you and follow you on social media?
Well, my name's hard to spell, so that's a difficult problem. And not only that, if you follow me on Twitter at Geoff, which is Geoff Calkins, Calkins, you'll get my damn nephew who stole it before I could. He's named Geoff Calkins.
Oh my gosh.
He worked for Flatiron Health and made $1 bazillion, and I think he's essentially retired, and he's 30 something. And so, but that's Geoff. So you have to have Geoff, Geoff _ Calkins, Calkins, no U in Calkins. That's on Twitter. And then I'm really not on Instagram. I guess I technically am, but I'm never on Instagram. I've never been on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but I fill up. But you can hit me up on Facebook Messenger. But the best way to reach me, my email address is in the Daily Memphian, gcalkins@dailymemphian.com. People can send me an email address. I try to answer every email. I don't try to answer every person who @s me on Twitter, but every email I try to answer. So if anyone wants to reach me on email, gcalkins@dailymemphian.com. Those are some of the ways.
Awesome.
We're all too accessible though, Michael. That's the other problem, and there's some, one of my pet peeves is if you don't answer someone's text in 5 minutes, they think it's rude. But what about a text? Like, why do you get to go to the front of someone's line in their attention span just because you sent them a text? Maybe they have 10 other things they're doing in a day. Maybe they're meeting with someone. Maybe they're whatever. Maybe and this idea that by sending a text, if you don't get an immediate response, it's somehow being rude. That is always irritating. Put your phone down. I don't do it. That's another piece of advice. Put your phone down for extended periods of time. I need to do that more than I do. My excuse is that my work keeps me lashed to my phone and Twitter and whatever else. But I do think we'd be better off if we spent less time on our devices.
Yeah, and we grew up fine without our devices, I think you grew up in the 70s and I grew up in the 80s and we were fine without them. And
it is amazing. Back then, like, you just disappear. Your parents wouldn't know where you were. They'd think you might be at the neighbor's house. Maybe they'd call over and they'd say, "Is Michael over there?" Whatever. And It was fine. Like, it wasn't the end of the world.
Right.
But, times change.
They definitely do. We met about 7 years ago at my former store, Sleepy Z's, when I started advertising on your show. And you, along with everyone else at the station, did such a great, incredible job on those live spots for me. And I always tell people that the best advertising decision I ever made was 92.9 ESPN Radio. I got more business from your station than any other advertising source that I had. And I had many. And, unfortunately, I got real sick at the end of 2018 with a couple of pulmonary embolisms that led me down a path mentally and emotionally where I ended up having to close the store about a year later. And even though the store was doing really well, that was
it. It was the business was fine. The bed
business was fine. Yeah, we were doing a lot of business. It just, I got sick, and then mentally and emotionally, I could not get my head back in it. And me not being there and being the face of the business is one of the big reasons why I had to close. But, things happen. I ended up moving in with my elderly mom, and she needed me to take care of her. So things worked out the way they were supposed to work out. I still catch your show probably at least minimum of 2, usually 3 times a week, and read your articles on the Daily Memphian too. And there isn't any other way to put it, but you're just really, really good at what you do. And I know your parents had to have been very proud of you and still are. And I really appreciate you coming back on the show again today for part 2.
Well, it's good to be on. Thanks for having me back, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'd like to once again thank a sponsor for the show, Platinum Jewelers here in Memphis, actually in Germantown, Tennessee. Geoff, thanks again.
Thanks.
See you again soon.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.